Hare Krishna, Namaste, Chapter 18, which is entitled as Sannyasa Yoga. Sloka 38. viṣayendriya-saṁyogād agre mṛtopamam pariṇāme viṣamiva sukhaṁ rājasaṁ smṛtam. A slight variation from the previous verse to this one. That is, the experience at the beginning and the end result reverses. Here, it is like nectar at the beginning while one experiencing, but at its ends becomes poison. That is said to be rājasaṁ. Whereas at the beginning, it is like bitter poison, and at the end it is nectarious. That is satvika sukhaṁ. Poison because we are not used to focus on the Atma, but as we keep practicing, that which appeared to be poisonous turns into like a nectar. Whereas here, since this is what we have been practicing throughout our life and for many lifetimes, it is easy to do when it comes to our body. Eating tasty food, drinking tasty things, seeing beautiful forms, etc. It tastes like mṛtopamam in the beginning as we experience them, but at the end it turns out to be poisonous. When one has an understanding that the body always has sukhaṁ and able to see body separate from the soul, in other words, soul separate from the body. In the beginning of the yoga or spiritual practice, it is not that easy. Therefore, it tastes like a poison, bitter poison, because we still hold on to the idea that I am the body. But as one continues the practice, focusing on the Atma, that I am not the body, I am the spirit, soul, as they mature, then what that appeared like a poison in the beginning turns out to be a nectar. When one starts with an understanding, I am not the body, and then switches his understanding towards Atma, then one moves from sukhaṁ to sukhaṁ. That is said to be satvika sukhaṁ. Whereas when one has an understanding that they are the body, which is of sukhaṁ, and unable to see soul separate from the body, therefore only focuses on the body and experiences various things that one derives through the senses to satisfy the body, is like a nectar. But as one continues in the same program, body program, at the end it becomes sukhaṁ. It is poison. So that which starts as sukhaṁ but ends in sukhaṁ is said to be rājasaṁ. Whereas in the earlier case, the sukhaṁ led to sukhaṁ. Over here, sukhaṁ led to sukhaṁ. When sukhaṁ turns to sukhaṁ and the sukhaṁ continues, that is satvika sukhaṁ. Whereas sukhaṁ leads to sukhaṁ and sukhaṁ continues, and that's said to be rājasaṁ. Now let's understand the meaning of the sloka. Viṣaya, with external objects. Indriya-saṁyogād, due to the contact of the senses. Viṣayendriya-saṁyogād, meaning the indriyas, the senses, when they come in contact with the external objects. Eye seeing some forms, nose smelling something, ear hears some external sounds, hand touches some objects. Viṣayendriya-saṁyogād, when the senses come into contact with the external objects. Tad, the happiness which agre, at the time of experiencing, at the beginning. In the previous sloka also it is said tad agre viṣam. Over here also we see the same, but there's a slight difference. Tad agre mṛtopamam. At the beginning it is like viṣam, poison, but ends up to be nectar. Whereas here tad agre mṛtopamam. At the beginning it is like nectar, amṛtam. When we are eating sweet rice, we don't feel we are having a bitter poison because it tastes good. When we see a beautiful form, we don't feel that it's a bitter poison. Therefore, at the beginning, while one experiences, it is amṛtam, it is nectar. Agre, at the time of experiencing over here is contact between the sense and sense object. Over there in the previous sloka, experience is something to do with yoga, the beginning of yoga, beginning of spiritual practices. Mṛtopamam, just like nectar. At the beginning, it is just like nectar. Over there, at the beginning, it is just like poison. Pariṇāme, and thereafter viṣam, like poison. That sukhaṁ, happiness produced by indriyas, senses, rājasaṁ smṛtam, is spoken of as rājasic. Translation: that happiness which is derived from contact of the senses with their objects and which appears like nectar at first but poison at the end, is said to be of the nature of passion. Viṣayendriya-saṁyogād, when the senses comes in contact with the sense objects, the tongue touches the sweet rice, gives a pleasure. When our skin touch some soft objects, it gives a pleasure. We can see this where the children has different types of soft toys, or nowadays there are many apps available which they can do things virtually, and as they move their finger on the phone or any device, they feel as if they are touching it. That gives them a pleasure. When people do sightseeing, they get pleasure through their eyes or by watching some movies. So the senses, eyes, nose, skin, ear, tongue, when they come in contact with their respective external sense objects, a pleasure is derived. That conjunction of the indriyas and the object brings about happiness. But that happiness cannot continue forever. Because one likes sweet rice, they can't keep eating sweet rice continuously for the rest of their life. And the same applies to all other senses. If one continues to eat sweet rice, it gives indigestion, heartburns, lot of other complications and problems. People then have to end up going to the doctor and start taking medicines, and that leads to dukhaṁ. As long as the external objects are present to give us pleasure, we are happy. If those external objects are removed, then we are miserable. Nevertheless, this program is easy to start. No hesitation, no objections. No one thinks twice. The mind, prana and senses doesn't need to be controlled. The senses are fully involved in this program. Exactly opposite to what we saw earlier. The senses are not in control initially. It is difficult to start. Lot of hesitation, lot of objections, because we never practiced anything good. that concerns our Atma. But this is easy because we are always focused on satisfying our senses and body. Therefore, we don't have any challenging questions when this program is offered. But more we think, the happiness that we derive through our body and senses are short-lived. As soon as we are satisfied, then a sort of dissatisfaction, distaste comes towards that, which initially sounded very pleasure-giving object. For example, simple example, a person takes a jamun because he likes jamun. He can take 2, 3, 4. Some people can even eat 10 or 15. What's after that? The same jamun which tasted so nice at the beginning and while we are eating, later turned out to be bitter. We can't take any more. Of course, we are very smart. We will pack everything and keep it for next day. That's what we do. But at least for that moment, we don't feel like eating anymore. Therefore, the happiness we derive through the senses and body are short-lived. And the happiness is also of lower grade. It is not anything to do with ananda that we learned earlier. This happiness is always interrupted by something or the other and keep decreasing. It's not one which keeps increasing, unlike the satvika sukhaṁ. As we saw an example previously, that by keep drinking alcohol, one gets into dukkham, not anandam. Whereas the extended sukhaṁ, which leads to anandam, is said to be satvika sukhaṁ. Whereas when sukhaṁ extended, which leads to dukkham, is rājasa sukhaṁ. As one continues in this rājasa sukhaṁ program, it may even lead one to an hellish condition. We have been talking about food, drinks, etc. But the activities sometimes, for some people, also brings sukhaṁ, called rājasa sukhaṁ. They like to steal others' properties, cheat others, lie, be arrogant towards others, behave with full of pride. All these things will lead one to hell. What is the cause of this rājasa sukhaṁ? Rajoguna. One has to earn money through proper means, and with that money one buys proper ingredients. With the proper ingredients one prepare proper food, and that food which is prepared in this method is offered to Krishna. Then that offered food, which becomes prasadam, is consumed by us. By doing so, one's sattva guna increases and rajoguna and tamoguna decreases. When sattva guna increases, one develops satvika buddhi. With satvika buddhi, one will have satvika jnana to perform satvika karma with satvika dhriti. Then that attracts the Lord's mercy, by which one's karma will be vanished. When all the karmas are gone, then that person will have no business in this world. He reaches the spiritual abode and serve the Lord over there. But to do this, there are not many who will be willing to come forward, as this sounds quite difficult. We have to be more systematic. We can't be however we want. It is like poison. Therefore, so many others takes the path to just enjoy the current life, focusing only on the body, this lifetime. But the difference is, through the other path, which sounded difficult and like poison, at the end gives everlasting ananda. Whereas one who decides to focus on the bodily happiness, when one continues to do so, will derive dukhaṁ both physically and mentally. Why? It is simple. By now, we must know the answer. The happiness to do with Atma is everlasting, because Atma is everlasting, eternal. But the happiness we are trying to derive through the body and senses are short-lived, because the body and senses are short-lived. So the question may ask, do we have to cut off the conjunction between our sense and sense objects? Answer is yes. Should we also do the same thing in our bhakti? Answer is no. As much as possible, we make the connection of our sense with the sense objects. The only difference here is the sense object. The senses are going to be remaining the same. Eyes, nose, tongue, skin and ears, they are not going to change. What we have to change is the connection to the external object. Based on where we connect these senses, it defines whether it is sattvika sukhaṁ or rājasa sukhaṁ. When we connect our eyes to the beautiful form of Krishna, when we connect our nose to the smell of tulasi that offered to the lotus feet of Krishna, when we connect our ears to Krishna Katha, like what we are doing now, when we connect our tongue to Krishna Prasada, when we connect our hands touching the beautiful form of the Lord and engaging in the service of Krishna, then our senses get purified, and that we derive from such connection is said to be sukhaṁ, sattvika sukhaṁ, and that gets increasing, and over the period of the time one gets anandam, because we are spiritualizing our senses by connecting them to Krishna and those things which reminds us about Krishna. Whereas when we try to connect our senses that does not remind us about Krishna, or in other words, those things which takes away from Krishna, and then we try to derive an happiness through those objects, then it is said to be rājasa sukhaṁ. To conclude, the happiness which arises from the contact of the indriyas, senses, with their respective objects, though is sweet like nectar during the experience, causes misery like poison at the end, is said to be rājasa sukhaṁ. In the next verse, we will learn about tamasa sukhaṁ. viṣayendriya-saṁyogād agre mṛtopamam pariṇāme viṣamiva sukhaṁ rājasaṁ smṛtam. Namaste. Hare Krishna.